So we'll start recording. So hello, Tammy.
Hi there, how are you?
It's a pleasure to have you with us today for the first round of the talk series of Keeping Ahead in Time of Crisis. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for accepting that. Hello, everyone. I will be introducing Tammy before we start. So let me tell you about Tammy. Tammy Gregersen is a professor of TESOL at the American University at Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. She received her MA in Education and PhD in Linguistics in Chile. And she's a co-author with Sarah Mercer of The Language Teacher Wellbeing, published by Oxford University Press. It's a wonderful book. I hope you will be able to read it one day and discuss it with Tammy as well. Thank you again, Tammy, for Thank you again for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you. And let's start with the very first question by asking you about your journey with ELT. How did you start your journey? And what about your researches and the books that you have shared in writing?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. It's actually my pleasure.
Thank you.
The one thing that I always have to say is that even though I'm a professor of linguistics, I'm a teacher first. And so if anyone ever says, what do you do for a living? The first thing I say is I'm a teacher. And then only after that I say, well, I'm an applied linguist. Because for me, the teaching is the most important, and what I'm the most passionate about in my life is training teachers. And training teachers is what I do, and it's what what gives me purpose and meaning in my life. So when I'm asked the question, how did I get into ELT and start researching and all of that and everything that I'm doing now, it all started by being a high school English teacher.
But English,
English teacher in the sense of English literature to people who speak English, right? So it would be like an Arab person teaching Arabic to Arab learners, right? So I was trained in literature, and I took my first job, and this is a fun story because I actually wanted to become a teacher because I knew that every single country in the world that had diplomatic relations with the US had schools where people could go. And so my number one goal in becoming a teacher was to travel, was to see the world and explore all kinds of new cultures. So I went to Chile, and I got a job teaching high school to American kids at the American school. But then I fell in love, and I got married to my husband, who was Chilean. And we in Chile. But then I discovered that, you know what, there's not much teaching Shakespeare if you don't even know how to say my name is, right? So my life path just serendipitously took this really fun turn where I had to take what I had and learn to teach English as a language rather than as the language art, right? And so I stayed in Chile. Now, when I began researching, it started, I think, like most teachers. And for anyone listening right now, you know, teachers in Egypt or across the Middle East, one of the very interesting things that we find when we're in the classroom is that we're constantly coming up against questions. And my first big question when I was dealing with Chilean learners was that they wouldn't participate unless they knew they could say it correctly. And there was this social image that they were trying always to protect, which was very strange for me because, I mean, the social image thing really isn't a huge part of my culture. And so what I discovered was that there was this kind of this uneasiness, which ended up being foreign language anxiety. And so I started looking at that because I wanted to find a solution to what can I do to help my learners just be at ease and just have fun with this. And so that's how I actually started picking this up, because I was concerned about my learners. So I stayed with anxiety, and I picked up a few of the individual differences along the way. And that was my first book. I wrote a book on individual differences. But then I realized that, you know what, I can know everything in the world that there is to know about individual differences, but that really doesn't make a difference if I don't know how to identify learners who have an issue or have something that they have needs that I could help meet. And so then I realized that students don't talk about it, or people in general don't talk about their emotions. They show them. And it's actually a fact. Well, it's actually a very well-researched principle that people communicate their emotion non-verbally, but they communicate information, and cognitively they communicate with their words. So if we want to know what a person is feeling, we need to be watching them, not necessarily listening, even though listening is important, right? So then I got hooked on this whole idea of nonverbal in the language classroom, and I wrote a book on that too. Mm-hmm. And so then I got to this point where it's like, okay, now I can identify them, or I hopefully am looking at how we can identify them. Now the question is, what can I do about it? And that led me to the path of positive psychology. Mm-hmm. Because I realized that it's not, it's a much loftier goal to look at what people can do and to work from a position of strengths and feeling empowered, rather than looking at my learners as something to be fixed. Like, oh, you don't do this well, let's fix that. Or, oh, you don't do that correctly, let's fix that. And so I decided that I really wanted to put aside a deficit position towards teaching and go with a much more positive focus. And positive psychology is all about that, because what happens in positive psychology is that even though they don't negate that dysfunction exists, because it does, right? The research in psychology has always been lopsided. We've always been looking at neurosis or psychosis, or always what's wrong with a person, and we don't ever look at what's right about a person. Mm-hmm. So that's when I picked up the flag of positive psychology and the whole idea of wellness. Mm-hmm. Now, where did it come in, the teacher wellness? Well, that came in because we have this whole focus across the world now on learner-centeredness. Mm-hmm. But if you look at who are my learners are teachers. Mm-hmm. Right? And so for me, learner-centeredness means focusing on the teacher. Yet at the same time, I want to say one other thing. I think that sometimes, even if you're not a teacher trainer, but you're a teacher of learners, and you talk about learner-centeredness, I think that sometimes administrators and society in general forgets that in that learner-centeredness, that the teachers get lost in it, and nobody's paying attention to the well-being of teachers. And so Sarah Mercer and I are on a two-human mission to change that, to get back into a place in the society where people recognize all of the amazing things that teachers do, and to understand that teachers are strong people, and they have so much to give, and that teachers, need to be perceived that way. And so the other thing is that I'm into teacher wellness because it's something that we can do. It's not like a personality trait or something that is unchangeable. Our wellness is something that we can make decisions about. And so because it's malleable, I like to talk about it because there are things we can do about it. So that was a kind of a long answer to a short question, sorry.
That's not a short one, that's a very big one. That's quite interesting, Would you tell us about the researches that you have been through? That's quite interesting what you are telling us about, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I've been doing some. You know what? I'm going to pay attention more to my most recent things because we're talking about wellness, right? And we're talking about trying to stay ahead in a time of crisis. So I would like to kind of focus on my last 3 or 4 years because, like I said, I came into positivity after individual differences and nonverbal, but some of the really fascinating things that we've been working on. There's this idea. Um, it it comes from three researchers: Martin Seligman, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and Peterson. Chris Peterson, but lamentably he died a couple years ago. But anyway, so they were working on this whole idea of signature strengths. And what they did was that all around the world to hundreds of different cultures. And they found 24 different virtues that every culture in the world values. Now, it might be that a culture values one more than the other. Okay, so I'm not saying that we equally value all of them, but all cultures value these 24 things that they called virtues, and they were able to categorize them into 6 different strands. These things, you're probably wondering, well, like what are these? Things like creativity, justice, love, zest, forgiveness. So these wonderful human virtues that, and it's true that cultures across the world, across the board, they're things that they value. So what they did was they took some time and went and studied with thousands of participants, and they created a survey called Virtues in it's called the Virtues in Action website. If you go via.org, okay, V Virtue in I Action A VIA.org. They have a
VIA.org. Yeah.
VIA.org. If
Yeah.
you go there, there's a survey. And thousands of people have taken this survey. And what this does is it goes and asks you many questions that you can take it in about 20 minutes. And then after that, they immediately send you the 24 virtues in your hierarchical order. So what are you best at? What are your strengths? And then, of course, it goes down to what you're not so good at. But the idea with Seligman, Csikszentmihalyi, and Peterson is that we use these virtues in new ways. So one of their positive psychology inventions is to commit yourself to use your strengths in new and novel ways throughout the next week, and then to see how you feel about it. Now, the one thing about the studies that they've done on working with your strengths is that people are energized by it because they feel like they're doing something that they know they do well, right? So now my research. So what did we want to do? So as you know, I'm a teacher trainer. And so one of the things that I realized is that, my research always comes from the problems that arise in my professional life, sometimes my personal life too, but my professional life. One of the things that I realized that once my learners, my teachers were done with the university and they were novice teachers, first, second, third year teachers in the schools, that sometimes they floundered and got lost, and they weren't being mentored as they needed to be mentored, because there's only so much that we can do at universities to prepare teachers, right? Even though we have them in practice and we have them in practicum, as a mother duck, right? I'm sending my ducklings out into the pond, and sometimes they need a little bit more mentoring than I'm able to give. So and then I became concerned with, because of my own personal experience in life, is that it's better not to have any mentor than to have a bad one. The only thing worse than having than not having a mentor is having a mentor who's a bad one, or who you don't dive with. So my concern, how can teachers be matched with experienced teachers in order to be mentored in appropriate ways. So what did I do? I had my teaching practice teachers. So they were in their final year of university and they were doing their practicum. And I had hundreds of teachers that were already in service, right? And who were still very close friends of mine. So I put out a Facebook message. Hey, I need to recruit some experienced teachers to help me out with a study that I'm doing on using signature strengths with novice teachers. How many of you would be willing to work with me? So I had so many of my old students come back and say, I would love to. So what did we do? We had my experienced teachers and my teachers in practice take the Virtues in Action survey. And then they sent me their results, and I matched my novice teachers with my experienced teachers based upon their strengths. And then I had experienced teachers send advice. They never met. They were virtually in contact. Send advice to practice teachers while they were in practice in new and novel ways that they have successfully used their strengths over their teaching experience in the number of years, and that's worked for them. So my experienced teachers were using the same strengths that my novice teachers had, and were sharing ways of using them in ways that benefited learners and themselves. And it was the most amazing results.
That's
So
wonderful.
it was amazing. When I interviewed my novice teachers, and they told me how beneficial it was, first of all, to use their strengths instead of me on them saying, hey, you don't do this right, you don't do that right, you need to do this, you need to do that, but rather saying, hey, you know what, you are so good at that, why don't you try this too, right? So they said, first of all, being able to use their strengths was so exciting for them. And secondly, to be mentored by people that they felt a bond with, that they felt an affinity with. This person knows me because they are like me. That was just a beautiful thing. So that was one of the recent things that I did, and it was one of my favorites.
And
So
that's wonderful. Yes, that's great. That's really applying what you really were so much concerned about and what you really wanted to help the people to do. You really applied it on in real life, and especially this idea of mentoring, because this
right,
idea of mentoring, I totally agree with you. It's better to have a good mentor rather than not to have a good one. A bad one, I'm sorry, rather than having a bad one. You know,
yeah,
we've been, we had an article for one of the IETFL 6 recently. It's about a teacher in Trinidad and Tobago, and he has been involved in a project for teaching deaf students. And he has been telling us about this idea that the people over there suffer because they don't find good mentors, unfortunately. And again, yes, and again, we had another person in one of the Arab countries, again, telling us the same problem, that the novice teachers or pre-service teachers are already suffering from this idea that they don't have
right,
mentors following up or helping them what to do, showing them the way. So it's really critical for teachers to have this before they really start working as teachers. This is really important.
right,
I'm so happy with
right.
this research. It's a really wonderful one. So you have applied it in UAE, but not in Chile or in any.
No, no, not it. No. In fact, I did this right as I was leaving for the UAE. It was recently published, but I did it with teachers in Iowa in the United States.
Quite interesting.
I can tell you one that I did in the UAE last year, and it was also using strengths. And this one might be one that our friends that are online right now with us might be able to use. In this one, we used learners in a writing class, and they took the Virtues in Action survey, and then we had them using narrative frames. That's Gary Burkhugh's work on narrative frames. And so they filled in a story about how they might use their strengths in their own writing. And then over the semester, they committed themselves to finding ways to use their strengths in the best ways possible. So for example, there's one that I remember very well. There was one woman, a young Emirati woman, who her number one strength was creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And she had to write we knew what her strengths were, but then she had to think of ways to use her strength in her writing. And so I remember one week, she committed herself to using creativity in writing the introduction for a research paper that she had to do. And so I said, you know what? Take it anywhere you want. You know, use creativity in research and think of how you put this introduction together. And it was the most amazing introduction, even for a research paper, because what she did was she opened it up with a vignette, with a story that led into her problem and into what she was actually going to research. But it was just amazing how using a strength, you know, another strength was, let's see, I've got to think of another one. A person could be, I'm drawing a blank now.
Sociable?
There's social intelligence. Yes, there's one, good, there's sociability. Right, and very good. And I remember that you've nicked you've clipped my memory. This one person who had sociability, she said that she was going to meet with 3 friends over coffee to discuss ways and brainstorm ways that she might be able to organize her paper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what was happening was that we were telling students, you know what, I'm not going to tell you what you're doing wrong right now. I want you to use what you do well and gain courage and strength from that. Yeah. And of course, they had to get feedback on their work. But it at the end, when we were interviewing students, it was really a very heartening and encouraging thing for them, because the teacher was focusing on them and what they do well.
Yes, that's the important point here. The positive, how to keep students positive all the time and motivated to go ahead. This is the most important thing. Yes, because when we speak about this idea of learner autonomy, they need motivation to keep going ahead, because sometimes we as teachers, we feel that we are low down because we don't have enough motivation because of the troubles about the teaching environment and things like that. But when we try to help them to see the positive side, for sure we are going ourselves to see the positive sides in our work. So this is going to help them more. Hello, Tammy? Hello? Seems that we lost Tammy for, I hope, 4 seconds. Oh, hello, Tammy, are you back?
Yes, I had a problem. I got dropped. My call got dropped. Sorry.
No
are we
problem.
back?
Yes, you are back. Yes, your image just frozen and came back. So yes, this idea of thank you, the learner autonomy, again, this is very important, that we sometimes, by motivating our students, we motivate ourselves as teachers as well, because sometimes we feel that we are not doing enough, we are not having enough success in class. So when we motivate them, this helps us to feel more motivated and more enthusiastic about our work. So it's going to help us to refresh and have more ideas to go ahead.
Right, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Exactly.
Thank you very much. So you have already answered 2 questions in one, because I was going to ask you about why did you choose well-being. So you already coupled both of them. That's great. Thank you. Can you give us a name of a research that you have done? It has been published, so we can put the link for our attendees over here to benefit from.
Oh, sure. You know what, Maha, I could actually send you my CV, and you can pull them from there. The well-being book from Oxford University Press. That's the biggest that we've done recently, and that taps into a little bit of our research. We have we have a very nice article that came out recently in the Modern Language Journal on positive psychology generally. We have one that just came out in System on positive language education, which is a little bit different than positive psychology.
Yes.
Yes, we did one with teachers and learners, and well, most of ours are intervention studies. So what we've done was we've taken interventions from positive psychology and actually used them in the language classroom. So Maha, work if I sent you after the program, I could send you some links and you might be able to send it out.
Yes, please. That would be great. Yes, yes, please, please do. Please do. That would be great. Thank you very much. My next question would be again about this idea of psychology. I have had the pleasure of going through your chapter that has been published by Multilingual Matter about the book in the book of Contemporary Language Motivation Theory. The one that you have done recently. Yeah, I liked it very much because this book is a comparison between Gardner's and Lambert's ideas and how they went ahead through time. So I'm so much thrilled about this idea, and that's why I picked two of the ideas over there that I would like you to elaborate more. This idea of what is socio-educational model and what is integrative motivation.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Now, what we need to do is the whole motivation journey needs to be put in context. Because if we look all the way back to Gardner, Gardner was working in the 60s and 70s. And at that point, when he first started looking at, when he first created the model, he was working in an environment, in a milieu, where people were really focused on aptitude, okay? And it was, you know, aptitude that was going to be the precursor to successful language learning. Then Gardner came along and he said, well, no, not really. The thing that Gardner did was he answered a very important question, which was, why do people initially start to, or begin to want to learn a language, right? So he was looking at things contextually. Why do people learn languages? Why would anyone want to learn another language? And so he came up with with several different ideas, but what he did was he made a distinction between people who were really interested in integrating into the culture of the language that was being spoken, and something that was instrumental, which is how something that helps you get by. So for example, I would have integrative motivation if I was in Chile and I knew I wanted to live there and I wanted to become friends with my neighbors. I'd want to integrate into that society. My motivation would be instrumental if I wanted to get a job or I wanted to travel and use that language. So it's an instrument to be used. So what was interesting about that distinction is that motivation to integrate, that was the main theory, and it stayed for years and years until around the mid-90s where there was this call for, okay, that's fine. We know why people want to learn language, but now how can we motivate them to stay the long course once they've decided, right? So one question is, why do you want to learn a language? Another question is, what keeps you motivated on the long and arduous process? And so that became much more of a process orientation towards motivation. And that's when, you know, Dornier and Clement and Rebecca Oxford and Sheeran and Crooks and Schmidt, all of these gentlemen, they started taking a look at the process, and they started looking at tasks, and they started looking at things that teachers can do. Okay, and so that you know, and I'm horribly overgeneralizing. Okay, but then after that, then Zoltan Dornier, he came up with this idea of the L2 self. And this was right around 2005 when he came out with his Psychology of Language Learning book. If you don't have it on your shelves, I highly recommend it. It is an amazing text. He's got a new edition out right now in Ryan.
What's the name of the
Whether
book?
you have
What's
the psychology, you can Google it, but I think it's called The Psychology of Language Learning. The first one, Zoltan Dornier by himself. And then he recently did a second edition. It's with Routledge, with Stephen Ryan from Japan. And they're both amazing academics, just cool men, just great friends. But what they did, or what Dornier did at that time, about the time that book was coming out, was he came up with a self model. And what he said in the self model was that, you know what, the best way to maintain motivation within a learner is for a learner to be able to imagine who they want to be as a language learner, so that they have this image, this very clear image. The more vivid the image, the better, the higher the motivation will be. So that, well, not the higher the motivation will be, but the more robust the motivation will be. So the idea then, for us as language teachers, to incentivize our learners to imagine where they want to be, who they want to be as a language learner. And then what happens is that the language learners create strategies in order to get there. Now they have these visions come from imagining who they want to be, who they ought to be, like what are the demands of people around them, like their teachers, their parents, their social milieu, and also a negative image of if I don't realize or I don't attain the visual of the person I want to be or the language learner I want to be, what does that look like? So you have a point of comparison between what is the goal and what would happen if you don't do anything about it, right? So this is the self. So for me, the main idea is to stick with that whole positive image of who do I want to be? What does that look like? And what do I do to get there? And so that's the most current model. And now people are looking in motivation at ideas of motivational flow and motivational currents. And that is an idea that goes more, very strongly with the whole idea of engagement.
Yes, that's quite interesting. Quite interesting. It's a big field, but again, it's gaining more attention because of the changes that are going on around the world. So really, people would like to believe in themselves in order to be able to achieve their goals. Yeah. So again, it gets back to the idea of positive psychology as well.
Right. And you know what? What's interesting about that idea from Dornier is that it's such an individual idea, because the person that I need to be or that I want to be might be different than the needs that you have to learn a language, or the purpose that you have in learning a language. So in allowing the learner to self-define that image allows the learner to put what they need there, right? It's not it's not the same for everybody. And that makes it a really personal goal, a real personal, and you know what, there's something driving about that, right? There's something driving about that.
Yes, sure. That's the main motive. You have to have this motive, whether as a usual person or as a student or even as a teacher. You really need this to keep going. And again, it has to do with the idea of professional development as well for teachers. The more they have motivation, the better they seek professional development and help themselves and their students, of course, on the long run to go ahead with their learning.
Well, you know, Maha, I did a study in Chile that was, I was on a Fulbright. I was living in the United States, but I did a Fulbright in Chile. And this was I loved this study. What I did was I worked with 18 teachers who were working on their master's degree in Chile. And all of them were Chilean. So by virtue of them being Chilean, they were second speakers of English. Their native language was Chile. So I was working with teachers who were teachers and learners at the same time, right? Because while they were teaching a language that they themselves were still learning. I mean, I would, if I were a teacher of Spanish, it would be the same thing for me. So what I did was I had them develop this image of self, this L2 self, but I wanted them to do it as a learner and as a teacher. And then I had them doing a dialogue journal where they actually, their learner self talked to their teacher self. And it was crazy fun. Actually, that was published in Dornier's, Dornier had a book out with Peter McIntyre and Henry, Henry, anyway, Dornier, McIntyre, and Henry. And that, that piece was published there where I had teacher and learner selves talking to each other. And it was just so much fun.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yes, the more teachers understand about such ideas, the better they become as teachers, because I believe that you are helping them to speak themselves out, to express themselves. And so
Right.
this would give them a better image of how do they feel and what do they need to do and how they would need it, or how would they do it. They would think that as we usually get the advice of assessment for learning, how we help our students to see their strengths, where they are, and what do they need to do, and how they would go further with it in order to develop learning the language. So I believe it's another a mirror for us as teachers, that we have to do the same thing with ourselves as well. We need to see where are we and what are our goals and how we would think of applying them on the long run.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly, Maha. You preach it. You tell them. You tell them.
Yes, sure. Sure. Listen to Tammy. She's telling you this. Thank you, Tammy. That's quite interesting. I'm really enjoying this so much. And this will take us, since you have done a lot of researches, and as you said, you started as a teacher in high school, and then you moved on to researches, and then you moved on to working at the university. So what do you think of the idea of the teacher researcher? Lots of teachers don't understand the idea quite clearly, and even if they understand it, they are so much afraid to venture through it. What would you tell us, our teachers, about this?
You know what, the first thing I would say is don't get bent out of shape about it. I think that people, they hear the word research and they're scared by it.
Yeah.
But you know what? Yeah, research is nothing more than asking a question and getting data to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a formalized process, right? So action research is mostly what I do, because I do mostly classroom research. I very rarely do laboratory research. Most everything I do is done in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a researcher, I would much prefer to read teacher research than I would researcher research, because you know why? Because then I'm getting real naturalistic data. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting data that's invented in a laboratory. So what's interesting for me about teachers as researchers is that they're asking very important questions that are very real. And they get data from the people who matter, which are their students. And so when we do action research in the classroom, we're doing it in the name of making informed decisions for the betterment of our learners. So say, for example, I had the problem of figuring out how I can get my teachers to have better mentors. And that was a problem I had in practicum. I was the teacher of practicum. And so I used my practicum class. I asked the question, how can I improve mentorship? Mm-hmm. And this idea of use. So everything I do, almost everything I do is teacher research. It's action research. And it's research that all of my colleagues who are listening can actually do. If they have any problem that comes up, Johnny isn't learning the vocabulary in the way that I'm teaching it. Is there another way that I can teach vocabulary that would be more conducive to his picking it up?
Mhm.
Ask the question. Try out a few different ways. Gather the data. Take a look. Compare one way with another way. Do a pre-test. Do a post-test. Do a pre-test, an intervention, and a post-test. Try another one. Pre-test, intervention, post-test. How did he do better? Well, you know what? He improved when I didn't use word lists, but rather had him highlighting words and putting them in his own personal vocabulary journal, right? So it's just, you know what, teacher research, maybe we should just call it informed decision making, right? It's informed decision making. And you know what, I tell my graduate students this because they have to do a thesis, and the first thing I do every single time that I get a new student who's working with me on their master's thesis is tell them, look, you got to have fun with this. You've got to choose a question that you're passionate about, so that as you're getting the data, you get more and more excited. And that when you go to sit down and write it up, you can't wait to put your fingers to the keyboard because you have something so important to share. So the first thing about teacher research is to be passionate about the questions that you're asking.
Yes, yes, yes. This is the most important thing. Again, we get to the idea of motivation once more. It's the same thing. Yes.
Right? Right?
Yes. Yes. So this is the idea. This is the idea behind it, because we as teachers in class, we usually have lots of wondering about why is this happening? Why is there no success in this point? What can I do to improve this? Why are the students accepting activities and not accepting others? So sometimes the teachers, or many teachers, believe that it's not their work to do or to answer the questions. They believe that they have to do read research or ask a researcher to answer this for them. But the idea is that it's our job, it's another facet of us as teachers in classes, that we are researchers, but we are not aware of this. We need to be more courageous with asking the questions. And I like the term that you mentioned of informed decision making. It's a very interesting term. Yeah, if we realize what we really, the questions that we have in mind, we are aware of them, we'll start putting them down on paper and then starting checking them, collecting data, and then going ahead with
That's exactly right. And maybe sit down with a colleague over a cup of coffee and say, hey, you know what, this is what's happening. What question can we ask? And what might be ways to check it, right? Mm-hmm. And then it kills two birds with one stone. We answer questions that are very important, but we also have the camaraderie of sitting down with people that we care about, and getting, wellness, human wellness is all about other people. It's about sitting, about caring about others and interacting with others. So you get to do two things. You get to be a researcher, and you get to increase your own well-being because you're working with people you care about.
Yes, sure. Yes, sure. And that's the most exciting thing about it. That's the pleasure of having this kind of interaction with people. Yes. Yes. So this takes us to the second and important question, another important question. Since you've been working in the Middle East for about 2 years, what would be your advice for teachers in the Middle East?
I have something that's really important that I would like to share with my Arab colleagues. There's a guy, Hofstede. I think many of you have heard of him. He researches in intercultural communication. And one of the things that he's done, and again, just like Seligman, he goes all over the world.
Excuse me, what's the name? What's the name?
Hofstede. Gert Hofstede. H-O-F-E-S.
Just a second.
H-O-F-E-S-T-E-D-E. Hofstede.
Yes.
Okay, so what does he do? He goes around and he studies different cultures, and like the other gentleman that I was telling you about with strengths, he tries to find things that are across cultures that everybody cares about it. So what he did, he looks at something called dimensions of culture. He looks at for example, he looks at whether a culture takes on more feminine or more masculine qualities. He looks at things like power distance. How far away are people with power from people without power as perceived by the people without power? But the one that I really find fascinating, particularly because I'm now teaching mostly Arab students, but I live in the UAE, and I'm trying my hardest to integrate into the culture of this amazing culture of the UAE, and my incredible Emirati students and all of the students that come from the Persian Gulf. We have students from every country in the Middle East. But what I've discovered across the board is that Arabs, like the Chileans, like Latinos, are very collectivistic as opposed to individualistic. I grew up in the United States of America, and my country, where I grew up, because I'm a global citizen now. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I feel I would prefer to be perceived as a world citizen, not a U.S. citizen. But anyway, so I'm in the UAE, and the one thing that I am fascinated by is the solidarity that my students feel with one another. This whole idea of a group feeling. And it's not just during Ramadan. I mean, Ramadan increases it by 1 million, right? But all my students have this feeling of solidarity. And what I've realized is that if I can tap into that solidarity, I can work with that and use it as a way to make my teaching even better. If I can build the rapport among my learners that is almost naturally there already because they're collectivistic. They think as a group. They don't think as an individual person. Teaching has been so much more enriching to me because I'm working on their rapport, not only with me, but among themselves. And so when I'm able to get, I have a graduate class, for example, right now, with 12 students. And there are 12 students from 12 different countries, mostly Arab countries. But I got 2 Americans and the rest are Arab. And it is the most amazing group of master students because they really care about each other. And this group was the one that got caught with the COVID thing, where we had to go and work online. We had half a semester where we were working together, and we learned to work as a unit, as a group, and to build this really strong rapport. And so then when we go online, that followed us. And so when we were in synchronous sessions and talking like we are now, we were using Blackboard Ultra. Or when they were responding to each other's thoughts on discussion boards, I could feel the same sense of collectivity, the same sense of team, the same rapport. And it was just the most amazing thing for me. Because I think that working in the UAE and with Arab students, they are culturally primed to be group, to be one, to work in solidarity. And so that's what I would like to, I would like to say, you know what, that's one quality that I really admire in the country that I'm making my own now and of the students that I have.
That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. I like so much this term of culturally primed to work in solidarity. This is great because during these last 3 months, people or trainers have been discussing this idea of assessment online and having rapport online and how to keep to be able to do this online because it's not face to face, it's different. So again, it's this point that we've been looking for. It's the culturally primed work in solidarity. If we really succeed in having this kind of rapport, not only between the teacher and the students, but among the students themselves, it's going to work miracles when they start working online. So because it's already there. So we're just building on it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So the whole idea, and what I've been doing since the COVID thing, and we've had to go remote, and I would love to do a study on this. I am flabbergasted in a very positive way. I mean, just amazed at some of the responses that I get on the discussion board when students are responding to each other's thoughts. It's just, and it's interesting because in the classroom we get that, right? I mean, students are interacting in class and responding one to another. But when they're on discussion board and they have to write it down, they think a little bit more and they reflect a little more. And so it's more thoughtful, maybe. It's not as spontaneous, it's more thoughtful. So it's actually, it's a fascinating thing to read, and to read it to find out how are they doing emotionally one with the other. It's kind of fun.
Yes, sure. It's a very interesting question. So I would like to read about it. So I need to read about this research when you go ahead with it. It would be so great. I'm sorry, I would like to ask you about the Hofstede. What's the name of his book or study that you refer to? Because I would like to add in the chat.
Yeah. What I would recommend is that you go to his website. His website, yeah, if you Google Hofstede, 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 his website will come up. And on his website, he has all of his research, because he shows really cool. There's a place on that website where you can put in any 2 countries in the world, or any country in the world that you want, and it puts them. It gives them a score for how they are in these different dimensions of culture. So, say for example, the Scandinavians and the Americans are really high in individuality. The Latinos and the Arabs are really high in collectivity. And you can find there's just so many fascinating things. So what he's done is he's done actual applicable research that scores every single country on these different dimensions. And so if I'm ever doing a cultural study, I love to go there and just see what he's found out about that specific country, that specific culture, based upon his dimensions and what he's done.
Yes, that would be great. I mean, especially with that comparing the different cultures together, it's highly enriching for teachers as well. Yes, and this interesting idea of having this reporting face to face and then moving online, and the importance of the integration of different cultures together. This is it's a very great idea. And this, of course, would take us to the very important question, which is, what do you think of the future of education?
Wow. You know what? Here's something. Even if there's a vaccine tomorrow, and we all go back to face-to-face classes, it won't be the same.
Sure.
Because I think that we've recognized that there are many advantages that we can take away from having had to go remote. I've been privileged to be able to do hybrid classes, before COVID, right? Before the COVID thing, where I would do some things online and then some things in the classroom. And have you ever heard, some of you of my colleagues online here might have heard of a flipped classroom? I'm a huge fan of a flipped classroom.
Sure.
It means do your work at home and then come back to class so we can interact on it. So what happens, what I've discovered with this COVID thing is that I think that teachers are discovering that this flipped classroom is so much easier to do when we can use virtual space, when we can use the computer to be able to do the homework, to do the things at home, so that what we do in class is so much more enriching. I've never been a fan of teachers who lecture. I don't think that that's a way of learning. I think that answering students questions once they've attempted to get at the material is a very valuable thing. But I think just stuffing learners' heads with things that they could have gotten by reading it or by listening to a webcast, that a better use of our class time is to actually work with it rather than me using it at the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is comprehension. I'd rather be using my classroom time for synthesis and application and these amazing, much more higher levels of thinking. So why use my class time making them understand it? They can get that at home. And then they can come to the classroom in the face-to-face mode and do some amazing things with it. So why not, coming back to the classroom, we give our lectures, we send it home with them, they load it up with Panopto, and then they come back to the class and it's a real flipped classroom then. I hope that we can use this COVID thing as finding a silver lining. That this has been a really tough, really nasty experience for so many of us because we suffered emotionally and mentally. We weren't prepared to go online, right? So everything I'm talking about now is, well, now we'll be prepared, right? Because going online, I mean, having a class that was prepared to do face-to-face and suddenly have to put it online is not pedagogically sane, right? But preparing a class, knowing that we have access to all of these wonderful technological tools to improve their understanding of content before they get to class, that is amazing. So let's hope that the future of education, that in what we're doing now, that we're learning all of these amazing technological tools that later we're going to be able to have even better face-to-face classes. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, but me too. Yes. It's really great. It's really great that we have been able to, what we say, synchronize things together online. And we even gave our students the feeling that they can use it, and there is no problem in using it. It's the idea of just getting to know how to use it and how to integrate it together with our usual work. That's the most important thing, because the people at the beginning were so much shocked. What are we going to do? How are we going to get our own students? But they finally discovered that it's very easy. The idea is just how to manage integrating things together. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
In English, we have this expression, and you might have it in Arabic too. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
So what happened is the COVID thing created a necessity, right? We were forced. I mean, yeah. Our administrators have been telling us for years and years, you know what? Why don't you learn to work with some new technological tools? And we're like, when I've got time, right?
Yes.
But now, with this COVID thing, it's like we didn't have a chance. I mean, we had no choice. So now this necessity created all of these crazy inventions, right? So now, maybe there's a silver lining.
Yeah, let's hope. We really do hope that it's going to be again a healthy and motivating integration between technology, or rather face-to-face and virtual classes, and that things will get better instead of getting bad. Although as you said, we've suffered a lot because of this idea of the COVID-19, but yet there is a kind of hope, silver lining in what's really happening that we can really benefit from, rather than thinking only about the negatives that really happened behind all that. Thank you very much, Tammy. It has been so interesting. I don't want to stop talking with you. It's so really enriching and so really motivating. Thank you very much.
I had so much fun, Maha. And thank you so much for your invitation. And you were an amazing moderator. And it was I had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have one question here from one of our attendees. She's saying, can you have a career as a teacher and be a researcher at the same time?
Oh, I would hope so. I would hope so. When the first question that you asked, I said very clearly, I am a teacher first and a researcher second. And there are places that are very interested in teacher research. In fact, I'm going to tell you something. Right now, I'm working on a book with Sarah Mercer, and Antonia is her name. Antonia is a classroom teacher because Oxford University Press, they said to Sarah and I, you know what, we want you to do a book that combines theory with application, but we want a classroom teacher as part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
She is phenomenal, and it has been so much fun. I've got students from the past who are working with me now on research as teachers in their own classrooms because they're fascinated by the idea. Yes, the simple answer is yes, yes, yes. And I would recommend that everybody try to make more informed classroom decisions by creating a research question around problems that exist and finding systematic ways to answer those questions. And then publish it.
Yes, that's the very important thing. Yes, and then as we usually say, we advise teachers that they start writing maybe something on Facebook, and then they can go on a blog, and maybe they can. This is going to give them more courage to go ahead with writing because it really helps them to speak out their minds. And sometimes a very simple comment can help teachers, although we don't notice that.
Exactly. And you know what, Maha, I do something that might be a little, that some people might think is weird.
Mm-hmm.
I do a materials class as well as a practicum class. And when I have my students create lesson plans, the first thing I tell them is, look, when you're a novice teacher, when you're a first year in-service teacher, you're not going to have time to develop the material things that you want to do. You need to really be able to find out what is your objective, what are your purposes, what are your objectives for each lesson. And then the smart teacher is the one who can go online, find out what other people have found successful and adapt it and use it yourself, because that's why. So I tell my novice teachers, don't try and reinvent the wheel. Go on.
Oh, Tammy has got frozen again. Hello, Tammy?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my advice. Yes, teachers can be researchers.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure having with us, Tammy. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as we did.
I did.
Do you have a blog?
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Do you have a blog, Tammy? Do you have a blog?
No, I don't. Oxford University Press sometimes puts me up on their website with their blog, but no, I don't have my own. I should, shouldn't I?
Yeah, that would be a pleasure. Yes, sure.
Maybe that's something that I should learn from COVID.
You know, I have been through, before the interview, I've been through a ResearchGate, and I have seen lots of your researches over there. So I really advise our attendees over here to go to ResearchGate and see how many researches Tammy have already done, and try to benefit as much of it as possible. It's going to help you with your practical work in class, because it's really what we call real, as we say, we teach our students for real language use. Again, this is real language use. I'm sorry.
So.
Yes, Tammy, I'm sorry. Can we ask you to bear with us for 2 more minutes, because we have 2 more questions over here. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yes, no problem.
Here we have another question. Could we consider reflection to be one part of research?
Oh, 100%. And I would suggest that it's not one part of research. I would suggest that reflection is woven throughout all of the research. It's not one single phase. So we see a problem and we reflect upon that problem, and we think, what are the, what's creating this problem? And then we need to reflect again, what kind of question can I ask? How can I bring this to a point where I can actually, operationalize some answers? And then we reflect again, well, what could some of those answers be? And then we have to think, what kind of intervention would work? And then we create an intervention and we get our results and we think, I need to reflect on these results. How do I interpret these? And then we think, okay, this could be the interpretation. Now, how can I implement these into my actual classroom? So I think that that's a fantastic question. And I think that reflection is not a stage of research. I think that reflection is interwoven into all stages of research. That was a great question.
Thank you very much. Yes, and this again takes us to the different ideas of the smart classroom, that you start with the idea, you try it, and then you assess it, and then you reflect upon it, and then you try again, and so on and so on.
Exactly.
Another question over here: how can we use games online to attract students, like our brainstorming games in class?
Yeah, you know what? And I am, when we're in class, we're trained that way, right? As teachers, we were educated to be face-to-face teachers. And I don't know how old our colleagues are that are online right now. I am not a digital native. I am a digital immigrant, and my students know more about technology than I do. And I admit that completely. Sometimes I lament it, but otherwise I just say, okay, teach me. Students love to teach their teachers. For a teacher to say, you know what, you know more about this than I do. How about you helping me out? They love that. Okay, so now we're asking about games online. You know what, with the way things are right now, we've got to use every trick in the book to get kids engaged and to keep them engaged, because they don't have us standing over them anymore, right? They're people on the other side of a screen. Yeah. So if the games, however can, we all know our students. I mean, and we all know what attracts them, what will keep them engaged. And sometimes, I would suggest that even now that we're online and we're teaching remotely, we have to be even more creative in going to approach it. Of course, you've got, the one big problem with being online is if you're a Vygotsky fan, Lev Vygotsky, who's the social interaction, he says that learning occurs through social interaction in the zone of proximal development, right? What I would really love to see are how teachers can actually use breakout sessions or pair up students or have them working in groups on different kinds of platforms, whether it's Zoom or Google Meet, but having students continually gaming or working in groups, even though they're working from their own homes. So the only thing that I would ask for my friend who asked that question is, I'm 100% behind the idea of using games, but let's see if we can find ways through different kinds of platforms to still keep them working with other people.
Yes, so you support the idea of exchanging classes online as well, a cultural exchange on class, you mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Any more questions, guys? Okay. Thank you very much, Tammy. It has been a great pleasure having you with us and being generous enough with your time. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. My pleasure.
We would like to have you with us all the time, but it's the time frame that we are all tied to. But thank you very much for your time and for your expertise and for your all this experience that you have passed on to our teachers. And we'd like to meet you so soon again, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys. It has been great having Tammy with us today. And let me give you an idea about our next presenter. Can you guess who is our next presenter? We are going to do a series of talks every Sunday and every Wednesday. With different ELT and well-known educational stars. So we have started with Tammy Gregersen. I hope you have enjoyed the session today. And next week or next Wednesday right away, we are going to be having another interesting one. I hope you would like it. Can you guess who is the next guest that we are going to have online? He's a guy, and he's liked so much by many Arab teachers because he has been here to the Arab area for so many years, and he has even taught in Egypt before. I wonder, can you guess who is he? Okay, here he comes. Yes, it's next Wednesday, July the 1st. Same timing. We are going to have Scott Thornbury with us. Can you see the image? Yes. So we are going to have Scott Thornbury with us. He is going to be discussing different methodologies with us, especially about the recent changes in education. And I hope if you have any questions that you can put the questions the uh, on the link that we are going to put for registration on our Facebook page. And we are going to be having, as I said, more guests coming along every Sunday and every Wednesday up to the end of July, hopefully. Thank you very much for being with us here. And if you have any questions, you can just post them to us on the inbox. And at the same time, please follow up on our Facebook page. I hope you have enjoyed this session and looking forward to meeting you next Wednesday at same time, inshallah. Thank you. See you.